Welcome back to GovCast, a video interview series from Government Fleet Magazine, where we talk about trends, hot issues, and the state of the fleet industry. I'm Nicole Osinski, Executive Editor for Government Fleet. Today, I'm speaking with Element Fleet Management's Bill Collins, Managing Director for Government Sales, and Mark Iorillo, Director of Sales and Marketing. Welcome to you both.
Thanks very much, Nicole.
Okay, to get us started, let's start with our first question. And our first question is, how will the transition to EVs impact the collision management business? And what changes can governments expect to see as EVs become more prevalent?
Thanks, Nicole. So I'll field that one. The transition to EV, obviously governments who have begun that have discovered that EVs are much more expensive to repair. I've told a story about my daughter who's approaching 20 years old now. When she was 18 and first got her license, she tapped a few vehicles from behind, the last of which was an EV. And while the damage to our vehicle was zero, the damage to the EV was $19,000 to replace a rear bumper. Because of the sensors and the cameras on the exterior of vehicles today, they are much more expensive to repair than they had been in the past. And government budgets really have to account for this. There's a whole host of other issues, though. We would expect with modern technology that, crashes would be going down. But statistics show that since 2019, both crashes and the severity of crashes have increased. And a lot of this can be attributed to distracted driving, right? So people have tablets and phones in their cars today. So we see that higher incidence of distracted driving leading to higher crashes. More uninsured drivers on the road, which cause increased costs for governments when government vehicles are involved. So all of these factors kind of impact governments. Additionally, the repair network really hasn't been built out to date, so we're still working towards that. So all these factors kind of combine to increase the cost for governments. And since government budgets rise at a certain percentage every year, and their revenue sources are quite limited, it's stressful when the costs of fleet increase above the growth in their revenues.
I would say one additional piece to add to that is as we look beyond the technology that Bill referenced in these EVs, a lot of them are made from different materials. It's requiring aluminum welding and relatively new and significantly different certifications at the shop. So in addition to the rise in cost of parts, Bill mentioned that, we're seeing the need to address the network. And that doesn't necessarily mean any provider that you're with, their network. We're talking about the network throughout North America, right? What it takes to become certified in EV repairs requires specialized tooling, specialized labor, and that has additional cost to it. So we want to make sure that folks understand that it goes beyond just the technology that's in the vehicle and more expensive parts. You're looking at a different level of certification required, and that can have an impact significantly on your labor cost as well.
So then how can governments increase their recoveries through the collision management process? And what are some pitfalls you see during the entire collision cycle?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and take this one, Bill, if that's all right.
Sure.
Subrogation is something that's near and dear to my heart, right? And one of the most important things to understand when we're looking at not just EV subrogation, but subrogation throughout all of collisions that take place in both ICE and EV fleet is understanding all the components that go into the recovery. And it starts with the demand. We want to start the demand as quickly as possible. And what we want to do is find a way to identify through the F&OL process whether or not it is a subrogatable event. And then we need to make sure that we're obtaining all the necessary information that is required. And usually that means gathering a police report, making sure we have the title for the vehicle so we can get the value of it and take a look at all aspects of it. We want to make sure that we're recovering not just for the bent metal on the repair itself, but there are additional costs that can be recovered through the subrogation process. And those include, and they're not limited to, the diminished value of the vehicle and the loss of use, the loss of revenue that would come through with the vehicle as well. And then obviously any rental costs that are incurred with having to operate the vehicle's replacement while that vehicle is down. So when you take a look at that as a whole, we really should be striving for a recovery in the neighborhood of 125% of the actual bent metal cost of the repair. If you are managing to those expectations, that's going to be one of the most important things. And, when you bring up the pitfalls, one of the hardest things to do is accurately subrogate without all the firsthand information from the repair itself. So if you are not party to the actual repair and you don't have great record keeping, you don't have the ability to look back and see what the estimates were, see what the parts were, understand the true cycle time, understand all the costs involved, it's going to make your subrogation efforts much less fruitful.
And I think, Mark, just what you're talking about is viewing accident management holistically. It starts from the time of the crash and it ends with the final settlement of the claim, but there's a great amount of process within that. And if we view that holistically, we can bring down the costs of accidents, but it involves all of those parts. And that kind of goes back to, how do we view fleet management? Fleet management, we look at holistically. If we're pulling all the right levers with each of the products from fleet, overall and over time, you keep those costs down. It's really critical for governments today because they do operate within tight budgets. So anything that upsets the apple cart is going to hit the general fund in the end, and that's discretionary revenue, discretionary expenses. You really can't afford to have an outsized expense in any one particular area. So, again, viewing it holistically, viewing it strategically, and bringing those costs down over time is really key.
Then how can governments use technology to help reduce fleet costs?
We employ technology across the broad spectrum of products we provide. If you just look at one particular product, aside from collision, fuel, we can help control costs with fuel by, identifying when someone overfills a tank, identifying if someone uses premium unleaded versus regular, determining if that vehicle's in the same location as the fuel card. I mean, all of these measures help bring down costs associated with fuel. We employ that technology across every product, and it's no different with collision, right? Certain technology will really aid in reducing collisions, right? All of the modern technologies they have, emergency braking, lane departure warnings, collision warnings, they all help to make drivers, safer. We use technology to monitor driver behavior, not to criticize a driver, but just identify those high-risk drivers, have avail them of safety training, and make sure all of those bad habits are corrected. And overall, the fleet is safer because you have a safer group of drivers. And that's how we employ technology, right? We touch every aspect of the product, the vehicle life cycle, to ensure that we're bringing down costs. And obviously, collisions are expensive, and healthcare for people who get injured in collisions is expensive. So we want to focus on the entire problem, bring down costs, increase safety, and increase driver satisfaction.
Yeah, Bill touched on something very important, right? And it's the holistic approach to, using technology to lower your costs. As we look at something like an effective safety solution for a fleet, when managed properly and incentivized with your drivers, and when you have buy-in from the top levels of leadership on down, it's very common to see reductions in collisions of double-digit percent over a 3 to 5 year period. And that can have material impacts beyond the cost of bent metal. As Bill said, it's going to affect your healthcare costs. It's going to affect things relating to your liability insurance. Everything is going to go down when you avoid any number of crashes. And that's very important.
So tell me then, what are governments and Element doing to address the rising costs associated with body repair? And what areas should they be prioritizing to help minimize cost?
It's an area where a lot of it is not controllable. So you have to focus on what you can control. One of the most important aspects of any well-run collision repair management process is going to be what we refer to as the quality control piece. And that is when we are receiving estimates from any body shop, we want to make sure that you have a licensed adjudicator to take a look at that estimate to understand, okay, is it within the right bounds for number of labor hours on this repair? Are the parts costs correct? Do we have the ability, if any of your fleet policies allow to, source aftermarket parts that come in at a much lower cost? Or at the same time, are we looking at aftermarket parts to reduce the amount of downtime? Obviously, we're always looking at OEM parts, but if it's going to require the vehicle to be down for an extra 3 to 5 weeks, is that loss of use worth more or less based on what you can source in the aftermarket piece? And I think the other thing that Bill touched on earlier, which is one of the most important pieces, is when we look at your overall budget for body repair, we're looking at the end of the year bottom number. I'm going to circle back to our conversation on subrogation because if you have an effectively run subrogation program, you can offset your total cost of body repair by north of 40%. So if you're able to recover 40% or more of your costs, that is the greatest thing someone can do to reduce their overall cost and reduce their overall budget.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mark. And also, we're talking about transition to EV. There will be certain trade-offs. In terms of collision and paying more for body repair, governments are going to benefit in terms of engine repair, right? So electric motors are really designed to last a long time. So governments will discover all that money that they spent on engine repair they may have in reserve for other expenses. So, EVs bring a different dynamic to governments. While they require a lot of investment in terms of infrastructure, in terms of charging, in terms of garages, in terms of basic vehicle cost, they also have some benefits. And these benefits over time and increased safety and lower cost for repair in terms of engine work, I think will all benefit governments in the long run and help temper some of those rising costs.
Well, thank you both for discussing this and sharing your insight into these issues. And thank you for joining us on GovCast. And thank you to all of our viewers who tuned in, and we hope you'll join us again soon for another GovCast episode.